Hi, Commissioner Cardenas. We can see that you joined the meeting. I don't know if you wanted to test your mic and camera.
How's the audio? Can you hear me okay?
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. Ms. Linker, would you care to call the roll?
Commissioner Cardenas,
Here.
Commissioner Hatch,
Here.
Commissioner Wilson,
Here.
Chair Matich.
Here. All right, good morning, everyone. We'll begin with public comment for items not on the agenda. I see that we have some digital public comment, but at this time, is there any public comment on the telephone for items not on today's agenda? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and proceed to item number 2, approval of the commission meeting minutes from August 2020. Do commissioners have any comments or edits to the meeting minutes? Hearing and seeing none, is there any public comment on the meeting minutes? Hearing and seeing none, do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Linker?
Commissioner Cardenas,
Yes.
Commissioner Hatch,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson,
Aye.
Chair Matich.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thank you. We'll now proceed to our enforcement consent calendar. This is items 3 through 6 on the agenda. At this time, we are going to pull item 6 at the request of the Chief of Enforcement. My understanding is we've received some additional information and staff requested some time to evaluate that. So we're pulling item 6 and it'll be presented at a future agenda. Do any commissioners wish to pull any of the remaining enforcement consent items, 3, 4, or 5? Hearing and seeing none, is there any comments by commissioners on the enforcement consent calendar? Do we have any public comment on the remaining items on the enforcement consent calendar?
I have a public comment.
What was that?
Do we have somebody on the phone?
Yes, hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, there's quite a bit of feedback, though.
Okay. Is that from me, the feedback from me? Are we good?
No, we continue to have feedback.
Okay. How about now? Nothing from me. I'm just on the phone.
All right, hang on one second.
Okay.
Hello? Okay, go ahead and proceed with public comment on the item. We're on the enforcement consent calendar, items 3 through 5. Do we have public comment on those items?
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Fassam Hagag, the City Clerk and Chief Elections Official for the City of Santa Clara. I understand that item 6 has been pulled and that the Commission was provided with my letter of request to continue the item to a later date. So I won't belabor any of the points mentioned in my letter and go into the specifics of item 6, but I just wanted to mention 3 quick comments, if that's okay. So I wanted to take this opportunity to introduce myself on behalf of the entire City of Santa Clara. We are very appreciative of the work the FEPC is doing to combat dark money influence in politics. As a city, we're taking dark money very seriously as well. As a result of the activity of Blue PAC in the 2016 election, the City of Santa Clara passed a dark money ordinance, which requires contributions of $100 or more from any organization to be reported as campaign contributions. And we believe we're the first city in the nation to take this step. So we're very grateful for the opportunity to engage staff in this issue as it pertains to dark money influence on a small city. Second, I want to extend my gratitude and appreciation for all the hard work that staff has done and is doing on this particular case. The level of sophistication in the details of this case are not easy, and I understand that it is rare for an investigation to be open this long, but that's a testament to staff's dedication in taking dark money very seriously, and I want to publicly commend them for that. And finally, I wanted to offer my help to the FEPC in how other small cities deal with dark money. The $50,000 threshold may be appropriate for statewide campaigns or campaigns of large cities, but for small and medium cities like our own, the threshold may still be large enough to have a significant impact on elections. For example, our Santa Clara council races have a voluntary expenditure cap of $25,000. So the $50,000 threshold can really make an impact in our elections. And that's why our new dark money ordinance sets a $100 contribution threshold for reporting requirements. So I want to again thank staff and offer my help to the FCPC in any way appropriate. Once again, thank you for your time and your hard work.
Thank you. Appreciate your public comment. At this time, do we have any additional public comment on the enforcement consent calendar? Hearing none, do we have a motion?
I move the enforcement consent calendar.
Second.
Thank you. Ms. Linker?
Commissioner Cardenas?
Yes.
Commissioner Hatch?
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson?
Aye.
Chair Matich?
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thank you. We'll proceed to item 7 and item 8. These are both notices of intent to present default decision and order at the October commission meeting. Item number 7, Ms. West, are you presenting this item?
Oh, yes, both items are as submitted, asking for a public notice of these pre-notice on defaults. As you know, this was the procedure that we implemented at Commissioner Hatch's suggestion to try to give a little more incentive to people to settle their cases as opposed to letting them fall into default. So this is the pre-notice for these two SCI non-filers.
All right. Thank you. Do commissioners have any comments on item 7 or item 8? Commissioner Hatch?
Mr. Chair, Ms. West, I was curious if you had any communication back from either of those since this has been posted.
There's been no progress and no filings.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Do we have any public comment on item 7 or item 8? Hearing and seeing none. Thank you, Ms. West, for your presentation. We'll go ahead and proceed to item number 9. This pertains to the appointment of the Commission's Vice Chair. As I think everyone remembers, Commissioner Hayward had been serving as our Vice Chair prior to her resignation from the Commission last month. Under our governing principles, we are required to appoint a Vice Chair to stand in place of the Chair in the event that the Chair is unable to attend or participate in an item. And so today I'd like to move that we appoint a Vice Chair, and I would move that we appoint Commissioner Wilson as our Vice Chair, pending appointment of additional commissioners, at which point we can obviously take up the length of time for the Vice Chair appointment. But for the time being, I would like to appoint Commissioner Wilson to be the Vice Chair.
Second.
Do we have discussion?
Second.
All right.
Yeah, discussion. I feel co-opted. I was going to nominate Dotson to the job, but you beat me to it. I wholeheartedly support.
Excellent. Thank you, Commissioner Hatch. Do we have any public comment on item 9? Hearing none. Ms. Linker?
Commissioner Cardenas?
Yes.
Commissioner Hatch?
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson?
Aye.
Chair Matich?
Aye.
The motion passes.
Excellent. Thank you, and congratulations, Commissioner Wilson.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Wilson.
Thank you, Chair Matich, and former Commissioner Hayward left some big shoes to fill, but you guys have all set a very positive example for me to follow. So thank you.
You got it. All right. Proceeding on to item 10 then. This is our pre-notice discussion of proposed update of commission regulations governing the filing of statements of economic interest. And today we have Commission Counsel Matthew Christie with us to present this item. Good morning, Mr. Christie.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Matthew Christie on behalf of the Legal Division, here to present for pre-notice discussion and update of the Commission's regulations governing public officials' filing of statements of economic interest. The proposed update would refine processes relating to the filing of statements, but would not affect or reduce overall disclosure. The primary purposes of the update are threefold. The first purpose is to provide distinct rules and processes to better facilitate electronic filing of statements and would generally improve the clarity and guidance of the Commission's regulations pertaining to the filing of statements. The Commission is currently the filing officer for approximately 19,200 public officials, and 65% of those officials file electronically. And many other agencies also use approved electronic filing systems to allow their officials file their statements electronically. Given the long-term trend of officials preferring to file electronically, further guidance on processing electronically filed statements is necessary. The second purpose of the update would be to reduce duplicative filings and thereby improve staff efficiency by revising processes for filing of statements by certain public officials who hold multiple positions subject to filing requirements. However, these proposed provisions would not affect or reduce overall disclosure. Finally, the update would revise processes for the filing of certain specified officials' statements to better accord with the capabilities of approved filing systems, electronic filing systems, excuse me. More specifically, the proposed update would repeal Regulation 18115, the regulation that currently sets forth the duties of filing officials, and would instead adopt a new Regulation 18115 that specifies filing officials and filing officers' duties with respect to statements of economic interest. With that provision, we'd also be adopting new Regulation 18115.1, which would solely address filing official and filing officer duties with respect to a statement filed in paper format. And then we'd also be adopting Regulation 18115.2, which would provide processes and direction with respect to electronically filed statements. The proposed update would also propose for adoption Regulation 18723.1. Currently, public officials often serve in multiple positions and are even required to serve in certain additional offices as a result of being elected to another office. For instance, the state treasurer is required to serve on the CalPERS board and therefore has filing obligations for both those positions currently. This proposed regulation would specify the process for filing a single statement that covers each of those positions or each position. Another problem which Regulation 18723.1 would address is that some local public officials also serve in another position with another agency in a different jurisdiction, and therefore have dual filing requirements, one for each position, that cover different jurisdictions and different filing obligations. The proposed 18723.1 would redress that problem by allowing such a local public official to file a single expanded statement of economic interest, which provides all disclosure for all affected jurisdictions, the broadest jurisdiction. The proposed update would also amend Regulation 18735. Currently, that regulation provides unique processes for the filing of statements by officials in certain specific circumstances in an effort to try and alleviate some of the difficulties with or the obligations that come with the change of position. But these unique processes, unfortunately, are not able to be administrated by approved electronic systems easily. And so we will be redressing those requirements so they comport with the general requirements applicable to any. Finally, we would also amend Regulation 18754. This regulation contains certain processes for an official who is a member of a board or commission of a newly created agency. Again, there are instances in this regulation that try to alleviate some of the burden of filing, but these are not able to be processed by our electronic filing system as written. And so we're returning these as well to the standards that are applicable to all public officials. proposed update would improve the efficiency of the FPPC and other agencies' processing of statements of economic interest, would streamline processes for certain public officials' filing of statements, and would not reduce overall disclosure. Proposed update is further explained in the pre-notice memo. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank John McKibben and Don Garcia of the LA County for their insightful comments on the proposed update. They were very helpful. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions the commission might have about the proposed update. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Christie. Do commissioners have questions or comments for Mr. Christie? Commissioner Hatch. Commissioner Hatch, could you please unmute your microphone?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had questions on in your staff memo on page 3 where it talks about the dual role. And I thought I read it last night that to mean that because of the electronic filing system limitations, a person who has 2 filing obligations because they hold 2 offices or 1 office is by virtue of that office in another filing, that they would still have to file 2 separate reports, 1 for each, because of the limitations of the electronic filing system. Is that correct?
Well, you raise a good issue that's actually addressed in 2 different ways in that regulation, Commissioner Hatch. The first provision within 18723.1 applies with respect to officials that have 2 87200 filing positions where they're obligated to provide full disclosure. So in the current instance where you have someone like the treasurer who also serves on the CalPERS board, sometimes we'd run into an instance where they filed full disclosure covering everything for both positions, but only under their primary position, the treasurer position. So in that instance, sometimes while we were administrating the filings, it would raise an issue as to whether that official was a non-filer with respect to secondary position, say the CalPERS position in our example. So the state level position there would only require the filing of a single statement with the official's primary position in case of a situation where that official service in the primary position requires them to also serve in the secondary position.
Okay, so they do only have to file 1 form, but would they have to provide the information about the requirements of each job? So you have to spend it. And does our electronic filing system have capacity to allow them to do that?
It does, Commissioner. This isn't an instance where we have any issues with the electronic system's capabilities. It's really just an issue of ensuring that we're not sending non-filer notices when we've received all the required disclosure, and people will be able to trace that position or a position like the treasurer would also serve on the CalPERS board. So when they look for that statement, they'd be able to trace to the primary position.
Okay, but the duties of each are not the same, and so the obligations to disclose are not the same. And so if one were looking at their statement, how would they tell if they're disclosing, let's say, some CalPERS obligations relative to investment decisions that are not an obligation, perhaps, to the Secretary of State?
So it's a good question, Commissioner, and I think
not Secretary of State, the controller.
So in the situation you're describing, that particular official is an 87200 filer for both those positions, which requires full disclosure. And the fact that they're both the same jurisdiction at the state level would ensure that those statements, even if there were 2 filed for each position, would be identical with respect to the disclosures. That's why we allow, just in this instance where these are 87200 filers that are required to fully disclose, that's the instance that this provision of the new regulations.
Mm-hmm. And will the form show that they are reporting for both offices, or you just have to know that?
It's a good question. As we're currently addressing it, it's something that, with regard to positions where the official is required to serve in the secondary position, it would just be something that the public would be able to trace through, following through the legal requirements that appoint them to the secondary.
You kind of trailed off there, I'm sorry.
I apologize. So the primary positions filings would be available to anyone looking at the secondary position solely by tracing the law that requires the primary position, the statewide office holder, in this instance, the treasurer, to serve on the CalPERS board.
Okay, and then to these others where you have a mixture of a local and, or maybe two locals, or a state and a local, does that, if it's electronically filed, they have to do two separate ones, is that correct?
It's not that they have to file twice. They would, or have to submit electronically for each position. The expanded statement filed for the city 87-200 local public official who's required to fully disclose would be allowed to be reprinted or to be reproduced and submitted as an original for the other position in that instance. And so they'd be identical. So you'd be able to check by comparing the two positions to make sure that there wasn't an omission in one that wasn't addressed in the other. And we also have a security feature that on any electronically approved electronic system, they generate reports that have what they call a SAN number, which is an identification method, verify the authenticity of the reproduced copy. So in that case, it would still just be the single expanded statement, but it would be required to be filed with each agency.
So that statement would show it's for the two different positions. There's a place to put each position. Mine's pre-filled out, so I don't know. When I do my electronic filing, it already has my name and occupation.
So it would be just like it is with yours, except for each position. So even though the contents of the statement would be the same of the expanded statement, that statement would be filed for each position, since there isn't that same legal bridge between the primary and secondary provision there is sometimes with the state level.
Oh, so they'd have to actually fill out two forms.
Well, maybe only fill out the one form, but then if it's electronic, submit it once, but then submit copies or electronic originals of that same statement to each agency.
Oh, I see. Okay. And then I think there's an example of where a person is in, because it's a city council person, is an 87-200 filer, but the other position is a what they call it, designated position. And then the filing requirements of a designated position can be quite narrow. It like goes just to certain expertises or certain job requirements. I thought I heard in there that they could file as the designated person, and that would satisfy the 87-200, which doesn't seem appropriate to me.
I think your understanding, Commissioner, was absolutely correct up until that last sentence. The 87-200 filer would still have to file a separate and distinct statement if it was the situation where the jurisdiction for the secondary or for their second position was larger than the 87-200. So we're not losing any disclosure. They could still address the designated position just by expanding the jurisdiction and providing all the disclosure for both positions. But with that, there's the caveat, the situation that you described, where an official that wanted to file two separate statements could file a statement for the 87-200 position and a different statement for the designated position, only disclosed what's relevant or required if they so choose. The city level provision that we're discussing is permissive rather than mandatory.
Yeah.
So it gives them the option.
Okay. Let me give you an example. Say I'm a city council person, but I'm also a state employee. Reasonably low level, very narrow duties. Like say, for instance, I'm janitorial supervisor, and I have some authority or responsibility around purchase of janitorial equipment. That's it, you know.
Right.
And so if I file under that, it would be a narrow reporting than the 87200. How do you meld those?
So in that situation where the official at issue is say a city council member at the local level, and then a designated employee at a higher or with an agency
statewide,
that has a bigger jurisdiction, they would actually be required to either provide all the information in the expanded statement, or not required. They would have the option of either providing the expanded statement that provides all disclosure for both positions, or they could divvy it out and only provide the disclosure and file separately for the positions. So if they were concerned that the particular position, the janitorial position you were discussing, shouldn't have full disclosure, they could disclose just what they're required to under that agency's conflict of interest with respect to that position.
And if they do a combined statement, how do we, as we look at their statements and try and tell whether they've fully disclosed, what parts of that are relating to which job?
That's a good question, Commissioner. I'm not sure that there's a process laid out to help discern that sort of thing. But if you were only concerned with, say, in our example, the janitorial staff's procurement duties, I think you would be able to rule out a lot of the obligation filing disclosure that's irrelevant, just looking to that distinct interest.
Okay, but there's not going to be anything in the form to allow you to identify what you're disclosing, which position you're disclosing for, and the various parts of the disclosure.
I think that's true as of now, Commissioner. It's something we could redress, but with that said, if that was an issue for the particular official, they would be permitted to file separate statements, only disclosing what's required for each position.
Are there any plans to perhaps update our electronic disclosure platform so things can be more precisely addressed?
I think we are working on updates to our approved electronic systems that are coming down the pipe. We have a recertification process for those systems. So as time goes on, if there are new adjustments that need to be made, we can always redress those when these systems come up for recertification.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your patience.
Happy to, Commissioner.
Thanks, Commissioner Hatch. Commissioner Wilson?
Thank you, Chair Matich. Commissioner Hatch covered some of the questions that I had. Mr. Christie, it was an excellent presentation, and appreciate all the detail and your hard work. But I do have a question regarding the 87200 filers, and that is, would someone be able to go to the FPPC's website, do a search under that official's name, let's say it's a local government official, and would all the forms that they've filed be pulled up through that search?
So I don't want to overpromise, Commissioner. I can follow up on that issue, but I'm not sure if the electronic systems would all work the same in that regard. With that said, if you pulled up the particular official's statements, you would be able to see all disclosure relevant to each position. So the statement still should contain, especially with respect to an 87200 filer who's required to provide full disclosure, that single statement would have the information for all the positions, even if it wasn't necessarily speaking to each of the secondary positions.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. And then I have one other factor for you to consider, in consultation with, obviously, the executive director and the chair. And given that every local government official would not be able to contact you to get your wealth of information, once this is implemented and these regulations are adopted, would it be feasible to, let's say, have a one-page fact sheet that local officials could and other officials could refer to, so they'd be very clear on what these changes are?
I think that's a great recommendation, Commissioner, and I think it would be something that we could definitely do. We're currently working on revising the instructions and the documents associated, or we haven't necessarily completed the work as we're awaiting direction, but we're in the process of looking over the documents that explain Form 700 and how to file. And we're going to revise all those and bring them before the commission after or contemporary with the proposed update.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Cardenas, did you have any questions before I jump in?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thanks very much. Mr. Christie, very well done. A question, you mentioned the comments kindly submitted by Mr. McKibben on behalf of himself and Mr. Garcia's office. Those comments and suggestions strike me as quite sensible. You mentioned the letter, but I didn't, I'm not clear whether you stated that they are being incorporated into your recommendations.
They actually are, and like I said, I really, the agency really appreciates Mr. Garcia and Mr. McKibben's work. I agree that a lot of the changes that they proposed were very insightful and helped to make it an even clearer product as far as the updated regulations. I actually have drafts of those that I've been working on incorporating those provisions. Du Wang and Cindy Glasser have been incredibly helpful through this process, and also were really helpful in making sure that those changes suggested by Mr. McKibben and Mr. Garcia worked with their understanding of the system. And I think we have drafts that are almost ready to be distributed once management gets to get a better look at them to make sure they don't see any other issues.
Sounds terrific. Thank you very much, Mr. Christie.
Thank you, Commissioner Cardenas. Mr. Christie, just a couple of questions for you. First, can you clarify for me the expanded form that we're talking about here that would allow folks to consolidate all of their information into a single form? Would that form identify all the offices for which the filer is disclosing information?
That's an issue that I think the commission could still consider, but in its current form, the regulation doesn't require the listing of agencies for the secondary positions, at least with respect to those that are legally required. So if the state level official that has 287-200 filing obligations that he's subject to wouldn't necessarily have to list the secondary position, but the hope is that someone looking into CalPERS's disclosures would be able to trace that a member of the board is the treasurer and find the disclosures that way.
All right. Is it within our regulatory authority? And if you need more time to look at this, that's fine, but I just want to ask the question. Is it within our authority to require filers to identify that as part of the form? I mean, if they're consolidating all their information to a single form and our goal here is to streamline things, it seems off the top of my head to be sensible that they would identify all the offices for which they are disclosing that information.
Chair, I appreciate your patience with us. I think I want to make sure that that is within our regulatory authority. My research date indicates that it probably is, but I know that there are some logistical issues that arise with requiring listing and instances where, for instance, if a certain official serves on many boards, there can be, we've run into instances where some are listed and some aren't. It brings into question how accurate and reliable that information is displayed that way.
Okay. All right. I appreciate you looking into it.
And this is Dave Bainbridge, General Counsel. Just to add in real quick, the form currently has a place where you list other positions. So it's on the form currently, and I don't remember if it's in the reg and required to list the other positions, but if it needs to be explicitly stated in this section of the regulations, we'll add that too.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you. So, Mr. Christie, I'm looking at, this is proposed new regulation 18115, and I'm looking at subdivision B. This is where we articulate some of the duties of our filing officials as distinct from filing officers. Under our current regulation, one of the things that the filing officials do is they have to make sure to supply the forms to filers. I see in this version you've changed that, you've eliminated that, and instead made it just to ensure that filers have access to the necessary forms. It may seem like a small thing, but I think there is a distinction between having access and actually an obligation to supply them. So what's the thinking on that particular change?
I think you raised an excellent point, Chair. And the thinking there was only to alleviate the requirement to provide that information in hard copy form. As you know, there's a fair amount of documents that provide direction and assistance to filers, and a lot of them can be provided online. So the hope was that that would clarify that that was also acceptable. But I think the point that you raised is one that we've discussed and we agree would be better suited to the statutory language. So in the latest drafts that I'm working on that incorporate the changes suggested by LA County and other interested parties, you change that back to supply.
Okay, thank you. And then I had, speaking of LA County, one of the comments that LA County identified in their comment letter had to do with the time frame in which filing officers would, I think, update the roster of names and positions of everyone who has to file. And currently, that's an annual requirement, as I recall. In this draft, you have expanded that to twice annually, so once on June 1st, once on December 1st. And you also, if memory serves, the current reg, I think it's February. So now we're moving from February once a year to June and December. So what's staff's thinking there? And LA County, I know, says that in their view, and I'm paraphrasing, that they don't see any reason why doing it twice a year is of a benefit. And so can you respond to that? Is there a discernible benefit in your mind to doing it twice a year?
Absolutely, Chair. In reviewing with the Statement of Economic Interest Unit within the agency, one of their biggest concerns in this revision was to take up this roster provision in order to get that information in a timely manner. It really helps that unit with respect to processing non-filer letters to have accurate information. And some filing officials aren't necessarily as prompt as others updating that information. So the hope with the biannual requirement was to get more comprehensive, accurate information. But in hearing and speaking with Don and John from LA County, they raised a good point that that wouldn't necessarily help or be worth the extra burden to the filing officials. So in the latest drafts, we're receptive to that input. However, we do prefer to keep the date of the annual report to be December 1st, so that those reports will come in with time to process them before sending out non-filer letters for the annual SEIs that are due very quickly thereafter. So the change to the date from February to December was just to provide staff time so that they're not sending inappropriate or unfounded non-filer letters out of
All right, thank you. Just want to check my notes real quick. All right, those were all my questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Christie. Commissioner Hatch, I see you have an additional question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Wilson raised an issue in his question that I wanted to follow up on. Is specific to electronic filing. I've been by absorption, learned over the years that the electronic filing that we do on the FPPC website is not the only filing system. Local agencies have their own system. It may not even be the same, constructed by the same company. And various state agencies also have their own, at their own desire. They opt in to provide their own electronic filing system. So if, as Mr. Wilson posed, if I search on our website for somebody, I'm only going to get the people who file on the FPPC's website, right? You don't have a integrated ability to search LA counties and Department of Health Services, State Department of Health Services. They're not on our searchable database. Is that correct?
Please take this with a grain of salt, Commissioner, because I don't want to misstate the case, but we do have systems to integrate data from other approved electronic systems, especially with respect to the instances that we're redressing within the regulations. Those are some of the instances where the two systems, our system and some of the approved electronic systems, are not able to integrate yet. And it's something that we're trying to redress through this update, but also in the future as we work to certify these systems and the technology improves. I think that will only get better and better. And we do have methods currently in place to provide all the disclosure in a searchable format on our system. But in the current state of affairs, sometimes that requires our staff to scan in paper copies that are forwarded to us from other filing officials under the statute. So the hope is that some of these changes will allow for staff not to have to do that redundant work of scanning in paper copies and yet still have the ability to show all the disclosure for all the positions within a search.
Right, but just to be clear, if today I search for someone who works at Caltrans by name, it's not going to show up because they have their own filing system.
I don't think that's always the case, but like I said, Commissioner, I'm not as expert at the interrelation of the approved electronic systems and our own filing system. The approved electronic systems, the Commission approves them under Section 87-500.2. And I think we've redressed regulations within the recent past, trying to address this data integration issue and to improve the circumstances. It does seem like it's a work in progress.
Is there anything that we should be adding or changing in these regulations that would help speed that along in terms of compliance by the other state agencies as well as local government agencies?
I can follow up on that, Commissioner. I definitely think it's a valid concern. It's also one that we've had in mind for some time, and we've redressed the regulation that earns recertification of these systems with the precise purpose of ensuring that when they come up for recertification, they're able to integrate the data autonomously.
Right, you have the leverage there, but do we have the stated declaration of our interest to make that happen as soon as possible?
I think it is something we're currently working on, but it might be better to get some technical expertise as to the state of how it's working at this current moment, because I would hate to give you incorrect information on that.
And this goes also to the chair's point about whether or not you're requiring them to state the other positions that they hold in their form, because if they're all in different systems, there's no way that the average person is going to be able to find out that that filing is for more than one position because they're in different systems.
Well, as we said, Commissioner, I definitely think it's a valid concern and one we're working on, but we do have ways of ensuring that all the disclosure is searchable. It's just that some of those ways are currently somewhat onerous, with paper filings that are submitted for the secondary positions and then submitted to our system through manual.
Well, I'm not talking about your IT guys. I'm talking about just John Q. Citizen getting online at the FPPC website and trying to find disclosures of a particular person. And he's not going to get all the information the way we have it set up now. And at least until we have the technological problem solved, we at least should have a requirement that he lists all those other positions that he's supposed to cover in that disclosure document.
I think it's a good point, Commissioner, and I would definitely take that into consideration and also follow up on the information about what the current state of the art is as far as data integration and our approved electronic systems.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Hatch, this is Dave Bainbridge. I would just add to what Mr. Christie was saying. Certain forms, the way the system is set up, not the computer system, but the SEI filing system, do not get filed with us. They just get filed with the agency. So in those circumstances, you couldn't find those on our website. That had been an issue we had discussed preliminarily with legislation to maybe require filing everything with us. So part of the issue is we have a system built or designed in 1974 where people are filing locally. So those forms never come to us. Any form that comes to us electronically is available and can be found on our website.
Chair, I have a technical question for Mr. Bainbridge. Yep. And I'm not looking for an exact number. Don't want to put you on the spot, but approximately how many agencies process forms independently of the FPPC?
I think we're going to invite Ms. Hahn to the table.
Yeah, I'm just looking for an approximate number, not.
Good morning, Ms. Hahn.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioner. To answer your question, Commissioner Wilson, there are approximately 400 plus cities that has their own filings, either system or paper filing officers. And there's 58 counties, and there's, I would say, around 200 state agencies. So there is give and take around 1,000 out there that has either their own systems that they acquire through electronic systems or a filing officer that receives the paper filing at their own agency.
And that's independent of the FPPC unless that agency forwards that information, to the FPPC.
Yes, because FPPC mainly only handle 87,200 filers, and then the 87,300 filers, the co-filers themselves file with their own agencies.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Bainbridge, just to clarify this then, so we have 87,200 filers legally file with the FPPC, but there are other filers who are not at this time legally required to file with the FPPC. They file with their own agencies. Is that correct?
Right, they're required to file with their agency.
All right. Is there any obligation currently in statute for those agencies to transmit copies of those SEIs to the FPPC? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, 87,300, I don't know if there's any of those categories that are required to provide it to us. There are certain positions that the filing officer provides us a copy, but it's a very long statute and regulation that describe, it's by position by position, who's the filing officer and who has to provide us a statement and who doesn't. But for the most part, right, no 87,300 filers send us statements?
Correct. The statements stay within their own agencies unless we get requests for CPR. Then we would reach out to the filing officer over there to acquire the filing from them. Otherwise, they stay within their own agencies.
All right. So in order to achieve the policy objective I think Commissioner Hatch is articulating, which, by the way, I think is a noble one and a good one, something we should pursue, that is something that it seems to me is ripe for our legislative program. We can do a lot through regulations. We can consolidate the forms, as we heard today. But to get all of the SEIs around the state, at the state and local level, in one place would require additional legislation. Is that understanding correct?
Yeah, that's right. And we've done a pretty good job here getting people filing electronically that do file with us. The number I got the other day was about 65% of the people that are required to file with us have opted to file electronically. So when given the option, people have been doing it, but with that, we're a small piece of all of the SEIs that get filed around the state.
Right, and that's one of the points I wanted to make is, there's what's filed with us, and then there's all these other SEIs as well. Commissioner Hatch?
Hey, I hate to raise this, but I believe that the FPPC has an oversight responsibility to ensure that all these filing officers are doing their job adequately. And if we, it sounds like we couldn't very well do that effectively because of the lack of ability to access this other information.
I'm not sure I heard it quite that way, but I understand your point.
Yeah, you have to have some ability to audit unless you are going to go travel around the state, to do audit work. I suspect that I'd like to be reassured that we're not letting this go.
So, Commissioner Hatch, with respect to 87-200 filers, which are some of the high-level officials in the state, they would all be within the FPPC system. So at least they're
by maybe 10% of all the filers.
Yes.
So
right.
what do we have an audit program set up to where we audit the work of the filing officials around the state?
All right, we're going to have Ms. West chime in for a second here.
Okay, thank you.
Hello. So what generally happens is we'll receive a complaint that someone has requested the SEIs in a jurisdiction and they've received zero, or the jurisdiction doesn't know what they're talking about. So we step in and we work with education to make sure that that jurisdiction has a code in place, they have filers in place, they're actually date stamping their SEIs when they receive them, and they're providing the public under the statute. So I would say we get about a half a dozen of those a year where there's some issue with the local jurisdiction, and then we step in and we make sure that they've got the proper education, they get a code in place, and are brought up to speed on what all the requirements are and on all their officials are filing.
So we put out spot fires?
Right.
But we don't have an integrated, systematic audit system.
Right, correct, because although we are the code reviewing body for many jurisdictions, the local jurisdictions is generally their board of supervisors or city council that would be their code reviewing body.
You mean reviewing the job of their local filing officers?
Right. I would say we do detect a lot of issues and get them solved and get them connected with education. We identify jurisdictions that when their referrals come in, we spot problems. And so I would say that we're pretty active in trying to get education to the problem spots in the state. So, I mean, so far so good in the responsiveness of all the local governments.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have any? Thank you, Commissioner Hatch. Do we have any additional commissioner comments or questions for Mr. Christie at this time? All right. At this time, do we have any public comment on the telephone on this item? All right. Hearing none. I see that we have digital public comment from Dr. Jadel from our office, who reminds us that we do have a local Form 700 search function on our website. All right. Well, this is pre-notice at this time. Mr. Christie, thank you very much. Thank you to our friends in LA County for their thoughtful comments as well. And look forward to this coming back to us. Is this scheduled to come back in November then?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. We'll see you in November, Mr. Christie.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioners.
All right. We'll go ahead and proceed then to item number 11. And that is our discussion and action item on amendments to Regulation 18703, the public generally exception. And we have Senior Commission Counsel Zach Norton here to present today. Good morning, Mr. Norton.
Good morning, Chair Matich and Commissioners. I'm Zachary Norton, Senior Counsel, Legal Division, presenting amendments to Regulation 18703 for adoption. Thanks. Better. Yeah, that should be better. So the Act prohibits a public official from making, participating in making, or attempting to influence a governmental decision if it is reasonably foreseeable that the decision will have a material financial effect on the official's public interest, distinguishable from its effect on the public generally. This agenda item involves amendments to conflict of interest regulations, which address how the public generally exception is applied. The proposed amendments would clarify the application of the public generally exception and improve the identification of potential conflicts of interest. Current Regulation 18703 explains the specific details of the rules for applying the public generally exception. Subdivision A provides the general rule and the two-pronged test to establish if the effect of a decision on an official's financial interest is indistinguishable from the effect on the public generally. The first prong is to determine if a significant segment is affected. If this threshold is met, we then turn to the second prong to determine whether the effect on the official's financial interest is not unique compared to the effect on the significant segment. Once it is determined that a significant segment of the jurisdiction will be affected by the decision, the official is permitted to take part in the decision so long as the decision does not have a unique effect on the official's interest in comparison to the significant segment. Subdivision B 1 through 3 provides detailed definitions of the term significant segment. A significant segment of the public is at least 25% of either all businesses or nonprofit entities, all real property, commercial real property, or residential real property, or all individuals within the official's jurisdiction. Subdivision C defines when a decision will have a unique effect on a public official's financial interest. Subdivision D provides a detailed definition of the term jurisdiction for purposes of determining the significant segment. And Subdivision E sets out special circumstances when the effect on an official's financial interest will be determined indistinguishable from that of the public generally and permit the official to participate. The current regulation was last amended in 2015 to address a historically narrow interpretation of the exception, which staff recognized made it nearly impossible for an official to show the exception applied. While the 2015 amendments were successful in broadening the scope of the exception and permitting some participation by public officials in decisions with broad effects on the public, there have been several issues with the adopted language and other opportunities identified for extending the exception since this amendment. This proposal is intended to give the Commission the ability to review the 2015 amendments to determine their effectiveness and identify further clarifications. The proposed revisions to Regulation 18703 seek to expand the public general exception in instances where the only relevant interest is the official's primary residence and further clarify the application of the special circumstances exceptions provided by the regulation. We address each of these proposals in turn. Proposed amendment subdivision B2 creates a lower 15% threshold for residential real property within the official's jurisdiction for instances where the only interest affected is the official's residence. Property interests have had a more objective and clearer bright line rule for determining disqualification than those interests in business entities. As a result, officials with property interests are more likely to be disqualified from a decision merely because of the distance of the official's property from the property affected by that decision than an official who has a business interest operating in the same vicinity. Moreover, an official with an interest in a primary residence is not attempting to further business interest in engaging in decisions that are likely to have cumulative benefits to the jurisdiction. Officials are elected to represent the interest of their neighborhood, and a narrow application of the public general exception may unnecessarily prohibit officials from serving the interests of their constituents. Accordingly, staff makes this proposed amendment to broaden the public general exception as applied to officials where only their primary residence would be affected by the decision. It is aimed at addressing concerns that such officials are too often disqualified from broad decisions concerning matters such as community development and building standards for flood and fire protection. Proposed amended subdivision E adds the requirement that there be no unique effect on the official's interest to the beginning of the subdivision. The existing regulation includes the no unique effect language in the special circumstances exceptions found in E5 through 7, but does not specifically state the language in subdivisions E1 through 4. Staff has determined that the no unique effect requirement is equally relevant for all special circumstances exceptions, and has consistently interpreted all exceptions in subdivision E such that an official may not take part in a decision where there is a unique effect on the official's interest. This amendment simply clarifies that the requirement is applicable to all of the exemptions enumerated in subdivision E. Proposed amended subdivision E1 makes clear that an official may not take part in a decision to impose an assessment, tax, or fee, or determine the boundaries of property or groups of persons subject to that assessment, tax, or fee, and is only permitted to take part in establishing and adjusting the actual amount of the assessment, tax, or fee once the decision to create it has been made without that official's participation. The existing regulation states that the exception applies to establishing an assessment, tax, or fee, which has introduced some uncertainty in the interpretation of the exception. As determined by staff, the exception applies to setting the tax only after the tax has been authorized and the property or person subject to the tax have been determined. Staff has maintained that this exception does not allow an official to take part in the decision as to whether a new assessment, tax, or fee will apply to the official or the official's business or property. Proposed amended subdivision E3 provides a minimum size for the definition under the limited neighborhood effects exception. The financial effect on a public official's financial interest is deemed indistinguishable from that of the public generally if the official establishes that the decision affects residential real property limited to a specific location. The term specific location used in the existing regulation is somewhat vague and could arguably be asserted to apply to a single street or group of homes. This amendment establishes a bright line minimum size of neighborhood to which the exception applies. The proposed minimum size of the neighborhood is more than 50 or 5% of residential real properties in the jurisdiction, whichever is less. And proposed amended subdivision E4 permits an official to take part in broad rent control decisions and tenant protection measures which apply to all rentals except those exempted by the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act, the state law governing rent control, provided that the official owns 3 or fewer residential rental units and only interest resulting from the official's leasehold interest as a lessor of residential real property and the lessee or owner of the official's primary residence are affected by the decision. This subdivision also includes a definition of the term residential rental unit for purposes of the exception. The removal of an express exception allowing officials to take part in rent control decisions where the decision applied to all rental properties and the official had 3 or fewer rental units was an unintended consequence of adopting the existing regulation. In removing the express exception in 2015, staff had anticipated that most rent control decisions would fall within the basic public general exception of subdivision A because rental properties make up 25% or more of residential properties in most jurisdictions. However, it was not anticipated that due to the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act's exclusion of large categories of properties from rent control decisions, the exception would not apply once rentals excluded by state law were removed from the calculation. As proposed, this amendment clarifies the application of the public general exception in the context of rent control and similar decisions when the official owns 3 or fewer rental units, and the decision will apply to all rentals to which the ordinance can apply under state law. And with that, I'll open it up for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Norton. Do commissioners have any questions for Mr. Norton? Commissioner Wilson?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Norton. Just one quick question. What is there an example that you can give without getting into anything confidential that prompted the need to adopt these regulations?
I think this is based, in part off of feedback we've received from the regulated community and staff's sort of own internal discussions. I know that, in particular, the issue of where an elected official owns a residence in a particular neighborhood and there's a flood or fire measure, that has come up quite a few times just in our advice requests. I do remember there was a private city attorney who represented some small jurisdictions came to speak before the commission a number of years back and had commented on it that, yes, this is a problem that we have people that are too often elected because they're concerned about fire and flood, and then they're out because of the sort of narrow interpretation. And that issue has been raised to me as well by people that have requested advice saying, if I'm out, then, this particular neighborhood that's at fire risk, we kind of lose our voice in the discussion of the ordinance. So it is in part due to public feedback.
Thank you.
Do other commissioners have questions or comments for Mr. Norton?
Yes, I had
Commissioner Hatch?
a question. Now I flipped away from it. This was this reference to the limited neighborhood effects. Could you give me an example of how that would apply in a sort of hypothetical situation?
Mr. Norton?
Let's see. I'm trying to think off the top of my head when this has come up.
Is it that the issue before the governing body is for some changes that only apply to a small portion of the city? Is that?
Yes. This could come up if you have a neighborhood, say that has parking restrictions that are only applied to that particular neighborhood. It might be a group of homes adjacent to a school or something, and they have parking restrictions in place that aren't citywide, but they are neighborhood-wide, intended to prevent parking for longer than, say, 2 hours or something like that. Mm-hmm. So you do have these types of, or traffic controls where there's concern that certain streets in a certain neighborhood are used for kind of cut-throughs, and they may want to impose traffic restrictions or new traffic measures, but they're really just targeted to a small specific part of town.
So if the council person in question lived in that neighborhood, this is how to measure whether or not they have a conflict as a matter of law.
Yes, and it's establishing that sort of the minimum size. That's just to make sure that we're not applying it to a situation where maybe there's a cul-de-sac or something with 5 or 6 homes, and they say, well, we want street parking restrictions just for our little neighborhood, which encompasses a half dozen properties. So we would say, well, that's a little bit too small.
So it wouldn't. So then this carve out wouldn't apply if it was a smaller segment of the community than 50 or 5%.
Yes. We're just trying to make sure that by neighborhood we actually are talking about sort of the whole neighborhood and not just the 3 or 4 homes that you could argue to apply to that. I think that might have come up once or twice where someone wants to apply this and it looks like it only applies to just this really small group. So.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Generally, I like what I've seen throughout the document. That I struggled with this to try and understand why it's necessary, but I think I'm okay now. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hatch. Commissioner Cardenas, did you have any comments?
No, Mr. Chair, I don't.
All right, thank you. Mr. Norton, I did have a question for you, and this relates to subdivision E. These are the specific rules for special circumstances. Number 1, it's public services and utilities. You mentioned that staff is drawing a distinction between the act of establishing the fee and the, I guess, subsequent action of adjusting or changing the amount of the fee. What's the rationale for staff treating those two things differently?
Yeah, well, I think we would not allow participation in the decision to actually create it, because that would seem to be, in our mind, that is the decision where there is a greater degree of discretion. And then once the decision has been made, normally the amount of the fee would sort of be easily established, because the amount of the fee would be in relation to the cost of the services provided. So we think that there's really less room for discretion on the amount issue, so that's why we would allow participation on that portion of the decision.
Okay, thank you. And again, though, I think it bears mentioning, or repeating, I should say, that even if the issue is one of adjusting or setting the amount, participation would not be permitted if there was a unique effect.
Exactly.
For a public official. So I think we probably can't say it enough. This is a two-part test, and the second prong is unique effect, and we're not changing that at all for purposes of this regulation, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. All right. Well, those were my questions. Do other commissioners have anything further before we call for public comment? All right. Seeing none, do we have any public comment on item 11? Hearing and seeing none, Mr. Norton, I will ask you one more question.
Sure.
We did receive stakeholder feedback on this, is that correct?
Yes, we did. We did have some outreach with the League of Cities, and they were generally supportive of this idea.
Okay, that's good information. All right, well, at this time, do we have a motion?
I move adoption.
Second?
All right. Ms. Linker?
Commissioner Cardenas?
Yes.
Commissioner Hatch?
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson?
Aye.
Chair Matich?
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Norton. I know this is something you've been working on for a while, so good job with this.
Thank you, Chair Matich and Commissioners.
All right, we'll now move on to item number 12. This is our legislation report. So we actually have two items related to legislation. So the first one that we're taking up now, item 12, is just remaining bills, or a bill, as the case is, with respect to the PRA. Item 13 relates to our proposed legislative package for next year. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Lindsay Nakano, our new legislative counsel, to the table. Welcome, Ms. Nakano, and why don't you begin by giving us just sort of a brief summary of your background.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, my name is Lindsay Nakano, and I'm the new legislative counsel for the FPPC. Prior to this, I worked for 6 years at the Office of Legislative Counsel, and my work there primarily consisted of drafting language for state legislation, as well as providing informal advice to legislative staff and committees. I'm happy to be here, very happy to be joining the commission. Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you.
Great. Welcome aboard.
So the legislative update today will be brief. The only active bill that is commission-related is AB 2151. That bill has been enrolled, but as of this morning, there is no further status update on the bill. There is an update from staff relating to the projected fiscal impact. After additional consideration, staff has determined that the fiscal impact will be less than what was previously projected. And if there are any questions on that fiscal analysis, I would defer to our Chief of Administration or Executive Director.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Khan. Commissioner Wilson? Yes.
Excuse me, for the benefit of the public, can you give us a brief description of AB 2151?
Sure. The bill would require a local government agency to post on its internet website within 72 hours of the applicable filing deadline a copy of any specified statement, report, or other document filed with that agency in paper format. The bill would require that statement, report, or other document to be made available for 4 years from the date of the election associated with the filing.
Thank you.
All right, do we have any other commissioner questions or comments on item 12?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Cardenas.
Thank you very much. Ms. Is it Nakano?
Yes, that's right.
Yes, thank you. Ms. Nakano, back to AB 2151. The apparently our own staff analysis suggested that a total of 3 new positions would be required to in order to perform the work mandated by this bill, and you suggested that staff has since revised that number downward. Do we now need 1 new position, 2 new positions? And my follow-up would be, did the bill as adopted include funding for that? And if not, what plans do we have on the budget side to prepare for this?
The updated fiscal impact is 2 new positions, and I believe Ms. Hahn will answer your next question.
Thank you.
Commissioner Cardenas, to answer your question, currently the bill has not been chaptered, so there's no funding that's allocated for this bill at this point. It is presented to the governors, and it's waiting the signature of the governor. We downwarded to 2 positions because the workload analysis that we provided and then management have met and then went over the workload analysis, and then that was determined that we really only needed 2 new positions to implement the legislations.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. I have another question related to another piece of legislation, if I might, Mr. Chair.
Please.
Ms. Nakano, in connection with SB 423, apparently this now relates to eventual urgency legislation regarding the conduct of this November's election. Would you remind me, we voted to remove sponsor position. Is that because as amended, it no longer applies to our bailiwick?
That's correct.
And then if I would, Mr. Chair, with your indulgence, I have another question on SB 300 toward the end of the report.
Please.
The way I read this reads as if SB 300 from Senator Umberg still relates to prohibition of foreign contributions. I believe, however, just following the link provided, the hyperlink provided on SB 300 as it appears in the report, that bill appears to have been radically amended earlier this year and no longer has anything to do, if I'm not mistaken, with foreign contributions. Do we have any awareness of this?
That's correct. It was amended.
Was it amended in such a way that it no longer deals with the Political Reform Act at all?
Yes.
So this should reflect that fact then.
Thank you for that. We'll update the report.
Yeah, that was a statement and a question.
Yes. Yes and yes.
So I assume this language was inherited because the legislative update is essentially a living document that's updated from time to time. You know, just a note to take care with assumptions about inherited prior work. In fact, in the body of the explanation of what SB 300 used to be, the cited case down there from the Ninth Circuit, U.S. versus Ravneet Singh, that was, cert was denied earlier this year, if I'm not mistaken. So in any event, that's, even to the extent that the bill would still relate, the background to it is quite different. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Cardenas. Do we have additional commissioner comments for Ms. Nakano? Commissioner Hatch?
Yeah, well, we're still on the page there relating to SB 300. Perhaps we should take an action to remove our support position and make it no position. So I would so move.
Is there currently a support position on file for SB
the
300 in its
document,
current version? Is the prior version? All right, well, we can, Commissioner Hatch has made a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, Ms. Linker?
Commissioner Cardenas?
Yes.
Commissioner Hatch?
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson?
Aye.
Chair Matich?
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thank you.
And as to the bill that was reported by Ms. McConnell, 2151, was there a change in the bill that triggered our reassessing the workload, or was it just a closer look at the existing language?
There was no change. I can answer that one. There was no change in the bill, Commissioner Hatch. It was an internal discussion among executive staff that determined that the prior fiscal estimate needed to be revised downward.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other comments from Mr. Kano? All right. Thank you very much. Now move to item 13. This is our legislative development plan for 2021. Mr. Kano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to present today the proposed legislative slate for the first year of the 21-22 legislative session. The first 8 proposals will likely look familiar, as those were proposed at the December 2019 legislative presentation. Proposals 9 and 10 are new. 9 would be a technical bill to remove gendered language from the Political Reform Act. And this is consistent with Assembly Concurrent Resolution 260 from 2018, which directed that legislation as well as regulations and other agency materials remove and avoid using gendered terms. So this would be a technical bill and would be considered non-substantive. The 10th proposal is also new, and this is a placeholder for any specific proposals that might come out of the Digital Transparency Task Force in the coming months. So we don't have any specific proposals in this area at the moment, but this is just a placeholder for anything that would be generated out of the task force, and anything that is generated out of the task force would be brought before the commission for a vote at a future meeting. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions or to speak on any of the proposals in more detail.
Thank you, Mr. Kano. Do we have commissioner questions or comments?
Just a clarification, the others are just carryovers from this year, correct?
By the others, you're referring to items 1 through 9 in Mr. Kano's report?
1 through 8.
1 through 8.
1 through 8, yeah, that's correct.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I might.
Please, Commissioner Cardenas.
At the very top of the report, given that post has not been previously defined in this report, should it not be defined, the organization?
Thank you for that note. We can amend the report. It's the Commission on Peace Officers Standards and Training.
All right. Any further questions or comments from Ms. Nakano on the legislative development plan for 2021? All right. Is there any public comment on item 13? All right, this time, do we have a motion then to approve the slate of concepts for Ms. Nakano and our staff to pursue for 2021?
I so move.
Second.
All right, Ms. Linker?
Commissioner Cardenas?
Yes.
Commissioner Hatch?
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson?
Aye.
Chair Manich?
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Nakano. And take a moment to also thank Jay Wairenga, our communications director, and Dave Bainbridge, our general counsel, for pitching in prior to Ms. Nakano's appointment as our legislative counsel. You guys did a great job getting us through. So thank you very much for your efforts.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners.
All right, we'll go ahead and proceed to item 14. These are committee updates. This month we had one committee meeting, and that was the Law and Policy Committee, the newly constituted Law and Policy Committee consisting of Commissioner Cardenas and I. And I think for my part, I thought we had a very informative and interesting presentation by Mr. Ford from the San Francisco Ethics Commission, talking about their experience with behested payments, part of our continuing efforts to understand what the issues are with respect to behested payments, and trying to determine what, if any, action we need to take in that regard. So we heard that. That was a lengthy presentation, and so the only other item that we took up then were interested person feedback on the pre-notice amendments for regulations governing the enforcement process. And we did not actually have any feedback from any interested stakeholders presented. We did, however, receive an update from Mr. Fazer, Senior Commission Counsel, with respect to some edits that had been made between the last time that was presented to the committee and our meeting in September. Finally, at the meeting, Commissioner Cardenas and I have recommended that in October, the Law and Policy Committee take up at least 4 matters, and that is first, to hear additional input on the enforcement regulations that I just mentioned. Secondly, to hear feedback from interested persons and stakeholders on our streamline regulations, which have been pre-noticed. We also will receive a follow-up report as part of our continuing efforts on behested payments. And finally, if there is if additional new legislative information is available, we'll receive a legislative update at that meeting as well. After the meeting, it occurred to me, Commissioner Cardenas, we may also want to consider changes to the Commissioner Code of Conduct. I know staff has been working with you on that. So if we're in a place where we have some updates to present and consider at that meeting, we might also consider adding that to our agenda in October with your indulgence.
Yes, great idea. Thank you.
All right, fantastic. So that is our proposed agenda then for October 2020 for Law and Policy. Commissioner Cardenas, did you have anything you wanted to add by way of update for Law and Policy?
Mr. Chair, I would like to echo your thanks to Mr. Ford of the City and County of San Francisco for his presentation at our last meeting. And again, congratulations to our own Ms. Harrison for a terrific presentation. Looking forward to further discussion on that important issue. Thank you.
Yes. All right. Thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and proceed then at this time to item 15. These are executive staff reports, and we'll begin with our Enforcement Division report. Ms. West.
Good afternoon. Well, I guess it's still morning. It feels longer than that. So enforcement's ramping up pre-election efforts. As you know, it's less than 50 days to the election. So we're a little short-staffed this year for, we've been lucky to add to our enforcement family with some babies, but unfortunately that causes staff to not be at work. So it's good, it's great for them. And we'll be happy to see the babies when everybody can come back into the office. But so that means everybody's working a little bit extra to get ready for this election and doing our pre-election outreach to try to get everyone to file before the election, because that's when the information is most critical. AdWatch is up and running. We're getting AdWatch submissions. We're also getting a lot of complaints about mailers, advertisements, and as you know, there's quite a few ballot measures. So It's a very busy time. Enforcement staff's doing a great job adapting to being at home, and we're using a lot of MS Teams and Zoom and trying to keep everybody working hard and focused. And the only thing is I can't provide them all food. That's what I normally incentivize them with. So the unfortunate work at home is that I can't mail them food. So, but it's a great time of year, and it really keeps your focus.
Thank you, Ms. West. We certainly appreciate all the efforts of our enforcement staff.
I just want to say, we're not at home, Ms. West, and keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's right.
As long as you don't mind new recipes.
All right. Thank you, Ms. West. Do commissioners have any other questions or comments for Ms. West on her report? Hearing and seeing none. Any public comment on the Enforcement Division report? Hearing and seeing none, we'll move to the Legal Division Executive Staff report. Mr. Bainbridge.
Dave Bainbridge, General Counsel. I would just point out we've been doing a lot of outreach and training for candidates and treasurers here as we get closer to the election, and the phones and emails are busy with advice, as you can tell from the numbers. So working away, getting people their answers as the election gets closer.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Bainbridge, and thank you also to your staff. I know they're experiencing a significant uptick in their responsibilities, and they're doing a great job. Other commissioners?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment, Mr. Bainbridge. Just want to commend you and your staff and the entire FEPC staff. You know, on the FEPC's website, you see notices of upcoming training, and so I commend you on your proactive approach to, you know, reach out to governmental entities throughout the state.
Excellent. Other commissioner questions or comments for Mr. Bainbridge? Any public comment on Mr. Bainbridge's Legal Division report? Hearing and seeing none. Ms. Hahn, Administration and Technology Division.
I would like to bring your attention to the Form 700, the Statement of Economic Interest. As we mentioned earlier, the FPPC process, not all, but approximately 20,000 plus of Form 700, either their annual leaving office or assuming office. So this year, due to the pandemic, normally the form is due on April 1st, and we have extended the deadline to June 1st. And as of today, we still have over 400 filers who have not filed the annual report to us. And during the month of July and the month of August, we separately have sent reminder to those non-filer to remind them that they need to file. Although we extended the filing deadline, as of today, they still have not seen much of those filing that was non-filer. So we're getting ready to refer those cases over to enforcement for non-filing purposes. So I just wanted to bring attention to the commission and to let everyone know that's hearing out there that you might want to file the ones that you haven't filed. And so if you don't want enforcement to knock on your door for non-filing purposes.
Thank you, Ms. Hahn. I probably will regret asking this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. The 400 individuals who still haven't filed now 5 months after the original date and 3 months after the extended date, those are just state filers that file with us. Do we have any idea how many folks who were supposed to file at the local level but have not? Do we have any idea on that number?
No, we don't have any idea on those numbers. So the 400 I'm referring to, it's only the state filers that we receive and not on the local level.
All right. Well, I would just echo your recommendation to folks who haven't filed yet to get their SEIs, which were due back in April. We extended it to June. It's now the middle of September, to get those on file or reach out to us proactively and provide us with the information so that our enforcement staff can take that into account. I think that's important.
Thank you.
And
Commissioner Wilson.
Thank you, Ms. Hahn. I'm also assuming that based on your presentation that, you know, the 400 individuals who have not filed, that's a significant increase compared to prior years.
You are correct, Commissioner Wilson. It's a much significant numbers than the past year. And we're just assuming it's based on pandemic, but we're not sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Do other commissioners have questions or comments for Ms. Hahn on her report? All right. Do we have any public comment on Ms. Hahn's report? Hearing and seeing none. Last but not least, Ms. West, the Executive Director update.
Nothing significant to report other than we've been working from home, and IT's been doing a great job. And everybody that comes into the office is always surprised to see other humans, and it's always a treat. So it's been going well, and as we ramp up for the election, we hope that everybody continues to work well from home.
Thank you, Ms. West. Do I have the Commissioner Hatch? You have a question for Ms. West?
Yes. Ms. West, would you please kind of update us on progress or what's projected progress on finding a replacement for you as Chief of Enforcement?
Certainly, we posted the position, and we posted it as until filled. And in the coming weeks, we'll start checking through the applications and doing interviews and getting the position filled, hopefully by the end of October.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hatch. Other commissioners have questions for Ms. West? All right. Is there any public comment on Ms. West's Executive Director update? Hearing and seeing none, that brings us to our final item, Commissioner comments and proposed future action items. Do any commissioners wish to speak on item 16? I see Commissioner Hatch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This relates to the public comment at the beginning of our agenda, Stephen Petzold. And in one of his two documents that were posted, he raised an issue relative to the stipulation with College of the Canyons that he has a public information request that won't be filled until at least the 19th of November, which would dictate that if we allow the impact of that to be known to us, we would probably have to put this off to December. Do we need a motion for that, or has this already been taken care of?
Ms. West will address your question first.
Certainly. So since it was the motion of the commission to bring it back, I don't believe the specific motion said it had to be back at October, but I could review the motion. Do you remember, Dave? Did it say specifically? So yes, if you'd like to make an additional motion, we are working to gather all of Mr. Petzold's information to make sure that we have all of his evidence that he is providing. And we are not going to rush the investigation, but so what I would suggest, and I think that the motion was to provide information or a stipulation at the October meeting, so I could give an update as opposed to presenting the stipulation, depending if it is completed or not.
Well, hang on a second. Can I just, Commissioner Hatch, hang on a second. What I hear you saying is you want to make a motion to change an action that we took at a prior meeting, and I'm not sure that's appropriate under item 16 at this time. We haven't properly agendized that. So I hear you, and I want you to have the opportunity to address the STIP and your concerns. I think since it's already slated to come back in October, perhaps we stick with having it come back in October, and if there is not consensus to vote on the item at that time, or if we wish to seek additional information, that would be the appropriate time to make your motion. But just as a matter of procedure, I don't think it's appropriate to make your motion today in item 16.
Right, and what I was saying was I thought the motion was to either bring an update or the STIP back. And so I could give an update in October and still fulfill the vote.
Point of clarification?
Yes, Commissioner Hatch.
Would that then mean that you're free to bring it back whenever you think it's appropriate without further action of the commission?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite. You sort of trailed off. I couldn't hear the last part of what you were saying.
Okay, I'll try again. Ms. West's comments would seem to indicate to me that she's fulfilled our motion in the previous meeting, and that then she would be free to bring this back to us whenever she thinks it's appropriate without any further action from the commission.
No, I don't think I think the item would come back for the commission to take action, either to accept the STIP at that time or to do something similar to what we did last time, which is say that we have continuing questions or concerns, and then we would put it off. So in that sense, we would take action, but it may not be the action to simply up or down the STIP. We may request additional information.
Okay, so it'd be my intent to next month request that this matter be put over to time at the discretion of the Chief of Enforcement in a future meeting.
All right.
And
Thank
not
you for
the motion now. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for giving us a heads up about that, Commissioner Hatch. Do other commissioners have questions or comments on item 16? All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn?
Second.
All right. Ms. Blanker?
Commissioner Cardenas?
Yes.
Commissioner Hatch?
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson?
Aye.
Chair Matich?
Aye.
The motion is approved.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Take care, guys.
Thank you. Be safe.